So the day has finally come. I have finally shot and scanned Lucky 200. So I'm excited to review this film. It's a new film that's been sitting in my fridge for about 4 months now. I bought it as soon as it came out and patiently waited for a sunny day to come. And none came. So I ended up saving these 2 rolls for my trip to Japan. I just got back from a few weeks ago. I'm excited to share the results with you guys and go over the pros and cons of this film stock. Lucky 200 is a 200 ISO box speed film. I shot one of the rolls at 200 and I shot another roll at 100 just to get an idea of the latitude of it, how much light can it truly take before it starts to die out. And yeah, some of my favorite shots were actually the photos that found that limit, unfortunately. First off, price. This film, as of right now, sells for about $15 per roll Canadian, and I've seen it as low as $9 USD. I've heard rumors of it dropping in the future if it continues its popularity, but who's to say, right? 15 bucks Canadian, you can't truly complain too much about that. I know that it's a bit competitive with Flick Film. Because Flick Film is actually based in Alberta, Canada, their prices are a little bit better. So I suppose first impressions, shooting experience, while obviously this is a 200 speed daylight balance film, I'm quite impressed with how the white balancing came out. I will briefly touch upon this later in the video with my scanning results and some little issues I had here and there with the scans. In terms of the daylight balance, it's not too warm, but it doesn't have too much of a white balance shift like some do. So for example, when it goes overcast, it doesn't immediately give like a ruined skin tones look. It doesn't turn skins too orangey or anything of that sort. It performs quite well in overcast situations as well, which is nice to know now that I have waited 4 months to shoot this film. It performs great. The reds are very, very pronounced. I love the reds. They're rendered so rich and so deep. The greens are a little bit more subtle, nothing too crazy. The greens in the shadows almost remind me a little bit of Fuji 400, but not quite so pronounced in that regard. It provides a hole in the market between Gold 200 as well as Fuji 200 and 400. Both of those stocks are relatively far from each other in terms of the balance and color shifting, might I add. I mean, Fuji 400 is quite known to have some interesting color shifting to it, obviously towards cooler tones. Even though the white balancing is daylight balanced, it tends to move a little bit cooler, especially in the shadows and such. Whereas Gold is pretty much the exact opposite. Lucky 200 has found itself right in between that. I really like it. I think it's very, very saturated with certain colors and a little bit more subtle in the cooler tones, which I find is a little bit reminiscent of the way I would color grade footage anyway. So I really enjoyed the color cast of this film, as well as just the overall shooting experience. This is sounding so corporate. I'm so sorry, guys. But anyways, moving on. It doesn't have as much latitude as a lot of other 200 speed films I've shot with, Gold 200 to be specific, in terms of price point. Easy to compare these two in terms of price point, but the Gold 200 does seem to have a little bit more range. The Lucky 200 does seem to be a little bit flattened, especially when shot at box speed. But when shot at 100, I did find it had some pretty good range within it. Not nearly as clean or reminiscent of Fuji 400, Gold 200, Fuji Color 100. It's not quite on that level. When shooting at 100 in particular, it doesn't really block up too much. It doesn't create too much crushing in the shadows. It does retain the highlights relatively well when shot at 100, with a few exceptions. You know, in extreme high dynamic situations, you are gonna experience a little bit of either clipping in the highlights or blocking up in the shadows, depending on which area you're exposing for. But having that said, it's pretty rock solid. I would say unless you're shooting, you know, sunset photos with heavy shadows in the foreground or anything like that, you should be just fine. In terms of the latitude, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily impressed, but it does the job. With new films like this, it's so easy for the internet to hype things up and get a little bit too far. I really tried to have a level head with my expectations of this film. Like, I knew the photos would turn out and be good, and the only thing I was really certain of was the reds being fairly strong. I tried to let the sample photos that I saw and the photos from other photographers speak for themselves. I try not to look into too many reviews or anything like that. I just wanted to pick it up, see what it was like for myself. And one thing I noticed from all the sample photos I saw was the reds are very rich. So I was very excited for that. In terms of grain structure with this film, I did find for a 200 speed film, it's a little bit noisy. Nothing too prominent, but it's hit and miss. Like when I shot it at 100 speed, the grain was obviously quite a bit better because you're exposing it to more light, you're giving it more information. But even shot at 200 speed, I found it was a little bit grainier than I expected. Nothing too insane, we're not talking about 800 speed film or anything of that sort, but it's a little more prominent than I would have liked personally. I'm kind of getting to that point with shooting film where I'm a little bit more into the latitude and color shifting than I am in the grain. Grain isn't really what I'm too into these days, but it's more than I expected, but I wouldn't necessarily take that as a takeaway. As you can see from the photos on screen, it's there, but it's not destructive of the image of any sort. I think considering the price as well, if you really did want something that was a much cleaner and finer grain structure, I mean, you could shoot like Santa 100 and then in your scans boost the saturation a little bit. There's lots of 100 speed films that are extremely fine grain that you could replace with this, or even 200 speed. I mean, I would say the grain structure is quite similar to Gold 200, except Gold 200, because it has a little bit more latitude, it's a little bit less pronounced with that film, if that makes sense. But overall, pretty pleasant experience, nothing too wild in terms of the grain, but it's a little more than I expected. So now we're gonna move on to the scanning behavior. So we're gonna start this off with the initial problem I had with this film. I found that the roll wasn't consistently balanced the same. Simply because like when I scan like a lot of films, I will usually expose them all exactly the same for the mid-range of the scan to retain as much detail, and essentially create a preset, copy and paste them all over. This has always worked well for me. If you've seen my digital scanning video with Davinci Resolve, you'll know that it produces very consistent results. So if you're scanning one roll of film, you get all your scans on there, you correct one, and you can copy and paste that preset and then do some minor corrections if you need to in terms of contrast, but you will never really have to correct the white balance. In this case, there were several photos that I needed to correct the white balancing on, which is a bit unexpected. Now, mind you, I did buy this at the tail end of, I believe, August or September of last year. It sat in my freezer and then moved on to my fridge, and then moved on to my fridge because I knew I would be shooting it in a week when I went to Tokyo. And then a few days before going to Tokyo, took it out. Obviously, I get everything hand checked. None of it went through an X-ray. I mean, you could tell from the photos it didn't go through an X-ray, so please don't pin that on me. But I'm curious if there was either an issue with the batch or if it maybe had to do with the possibility of some condensation from the freezer or fridge. I mean, I keep all my film bagged. Hopefully this isn't something anyone else experiences. I just wanted to shed some light on it, as it is something that I experienced with both rolls that I shot. So that was a little bit interesting to deal with. So now moving on to shooting it at 100 speed. Pretty good for the most part. I think when you shoot at 100 speed, do not meter for the shadows, as this film is much more sensitive to light than I thought. Shooting at 100 is definitely quite a bit better than box speed, but I wouldn't say it's as malleable as a lot of other films. I've shot Fuji 400 at 100. 100 is a little steep, but it'll do it and retain most of the details that you're trying to capture within your shot. So I suppose now, final verdict on Lucky 200 is pretty all right. I would recommend shooting it at box speed, to be frank, and then just kind of planning for a little bit of overexposure. Shooting it at 100, a bit hit and miss. I think it deserves more exposure than 200, but I wouldn't immediately jump to shooting it at 100 unless you've at least had a bit more experience with it. It's a bit of a finicky film from my experience. Having that said, it performs, it does the thing, it looks great shot at 200. The last thing I want anyone to think is that this film is difficult to shoot or it's like it has a bunch of problems. It doesn't. I got the first run, I had some white balancing issues. It is a solid film for the price. Pop it in your point and shoot cameras, go shoot it on a sunny day, it's gonna look great. It's not a bad film by any means. I just want it to be completely crystal clear. Would I buy it again? Probably. I think this would be a good film, considering that I'm the type of person that just stocks up on a lot of films, throws them in the fridge, and yeah, I think having a roll of this on standby is good. Yeah, I guess that's gonna be it for this video. Comment below what you thought of Lucky 200 if you've shot it. Like and subscribe, new videos every second Sunday, and I'll catch you guys in a couple weeks.